Hello, everybody. Good morning. It is so good to be here to talk to you today. Like a typical academic, I thought I would come and lecture you with some slideshows, give you a little bit of history, a little bit of theory, and a little bit of storytelling along the way. I've been told that I only have about 20 minutes, so I have about 4 hours of lecture, and there will be an exam, so please be taking good notes as we talk. Yeah, absolutely. The check, the bill is in the mail. Yeah, you won't get a BA, but what you might get, I hope, is some tools to try to change the world. So I want to talk about mobilize, about mobilizing. In my experience, when we look at the disability community, I think an often undiscussed history of disabled people is the fight for accessible transit. I think that transit is a key factor for people trying to get around. I mean, many of us that are sitting in the room today have had probably tons of interesting experiences with transit, whether it's transit getting to Toronto, or getting to Ottawa, or transit getting from the hotel to this venue with roads being closed and diversion of traffic. But I think that for a lot of people, people who don't use wheelchairs, especially, we don't think a lot about transit, or put a different way, we don't think about how our lives would be different if we did not have access to transit. Not having access to transit is something that was a big deal for people with disabilities in Denver, Colorado, back in 1978. It was at this time when a group of disabled people were frustrated by the fact that they could not get on the bus like others in their community, and they decided to take action. They did this by, quite literally, barricading themselves, handcuffing themselves to buses in Denver and saying, if we do not have access, then no one should have access. The protest lasted about a year. After a year of blockaded buses, like the image on the screen there, a lay-in as opposed to a sit-in, the group in Denver was able to push for and achieve a fully accessible bus system in Denver. And their action worked. And so they said, you know what? Maybe we need to take this elsewhere. They started going elsewhere in the United States, pushing for access in transit. And that group would later rebrand, would take on the name ADAPT. ADAPT being a massive activist organization in the US that was critical in pushing for the Americans with Disabilities Act that would be passed in 1990, an act that would later inspire us here in Ontario to pass the Ontarians with Disabilities Act in 2001, and eventually the AODA in 2005. I think transit then is an important thing for us to think about. It's important for us to think about because obviously transit is important. But more than that, I think transit gives us insight into how to be effective activists. I say this, of course, because I'm a little biased. In 2008, I similarly was frustrated by the lack of accessible transit in our province. And I also decided it was time for me to take action. And so it was for that reason in 2008 that I took my electric wheelchair and I drove it from London to Ottawa on the streets to try to raise awareness about the fact that right now, still to this day in Ontario, for many people in wheelchairs, if we want to get somewhere reliably, we have to do it ourselves in our chairs on the streets. So I think when we think a little bit about activism, we tend to think about perhaps the actions that we want to take. We think perhaps about the outcome that we want to achieve, but we don't always think about the roadways that will get us to where we wish to go. It's for that reason that I think we need to look back to an academic named Louis Althusser. Althusser had this question, which was, how does culture maintain itself? And one of the ways that Althusser said that our world is structured in our society is through what he called ideological state apparatus. These were structures in our society that influence the ways that we think about, see, and talk about our community. There are things like the religious ISA, the educational ISA, the family ISA, the political ISA, communications, and cultural ISAs. When we think about activism, I think that we often only think about one part of our culture. where I would argue that rather than thinking about only one piece, whether it's political action only or cultural action only, to get actual change, we must target multiple ISAs. We need to impact various parts of our community at the same time in order to get change. When I made the trip from London to Ottawa in 2008, I really was only working in the political realm. I was stopping and talking to politicians, talking to municipal government, provincial government, and eventually federal government when I arrived here in Ottawa. And while we were able to make some change, we didn't necessarily make the community more accessible, or at least not in the ways that I had hoped when I set off from London in 2008. If we flash forward then, 15 years later, as I reflect on the problems I was seeing in London back when I started in 2008 to last summer, I realized that many of the same problems still existed, that there had been a degradation in transit services in London during COVID, that not only were buses taken off the road, obviously, when the pandemic happened, but after the pandemic, we were very slow at bringing accessible transit back online. There were lots of stories of people that were not able to get rides on the specialized transit system. There were stories of people that were being left behind again. We were starting to hear more and more stories in the news, and it was in January of 2023 that myself, several other activists in London, got together and we started to form a plan. We decided that we needed to take action, and this time it couldn't just be one of political action, but rather we needed to hit on several points all at once. So we made a plan, an asymmetrical plan in which we would target multiple aspects, multiple ISAs in London to try to influence change all at the same time. So in January, slides are very small, but it's okay. In January, we started to ramp up media coverage of the problem. We started to organize storytelling by people with disabilities to try to frame the story about what was happening. This led to us forming a group. We brought a bunch of people together to try to gather as many bad stories of transit as we could to articulate the problem. And so we started to gather horror stories. We put the call out and we asked for people to email us bad stories, things that had happened to them on transit that were unforgivable. In about 2 weeks, we had gathered 65 stories, 65 individuals that sent us stories about things that they had encountered. We gathered the stories, we started to organize them, and we began to share them with members of local government, identifying where people lived and sending those stories to their city councilor. We then started asking people, what do you want different? What could change to make things better? And as we talked to people, we learned that there were really 4 things that could help enhance transit in London. Number 1, we needed increased capacity. We needed the ability for more people to get on more buses. Number 2, we needed an online booking system. It's 2023 at the time, now 2024. It is unbelievable that you can pick up your phone and order an Uber, but you cannot use a computer in order to book an accessible ride in London, Ontario. We saw there was a lot of inefficiencies in services. A lot of the stories we were hearing were people that were on the bus for over an hour driving around London, which if you're from Toronto, you're probably like, wow, what a fast trip. But in London, that is a horrendously slow trip. You can kind of drive one side from London to the other in like 15 minutes and probably stop for coffee on your way. We also felt that there was a real urgent need for drivers. We were hearing that the drivers were not being trained adequately. They didn't know how to interact with people. They were making a lot of mistakes when tying down wheelchairs and this sort of thing. We needed to do something differently, and we needed to tackle some of the discrimination being faced by riders who were riders of color or riders from the 2S LGBT plus communities. So we then moved into February, and we started to target the government a little more. We started to present to the civic works community and working our way through the subcommittees up into City Hall. We presented to the London Transit Commission to try to bring more attention to the issue and say, we know that there are problems. You cannot keep brushing this under the rug. If we flash forward then to April, eventually we were becoming very annoying for the London Transit Commission. By May, we started to get some response. And eventually, by September, after about 5 months of work, we were able to secure the 10% increase that we were looking for. We were able to get a promise that the London Transit Commission would become accessible by the end of the year, that they would have online booking, and that they would install, they become more compliant with the AODA. But the work continues today. So when we look at our sort of efforts over the last year and a half, there's a few things we've tried to do. Thing number one is we've been trying to target the education ISA, doing things like this, coming and talking to people about the importance of transit and the ability to do transit differently, about spreading the word that there is a better way to do it, but also identifying that there is a very real problem, a problem that exists not just in London, but across our province. It's also, though, about thinking about the legal system. When we started to investigate the London Transit Commission, we discovered that the LTC had submitted an AODA compliance report, which stated that they were fully compliant with their obligations under the AODA. Me, being an academic researcher, started to look into it. And as it turns out, we found many violations of their compliance requirements. For example, under the AODA, if you are allowed to pay with any form of payment on your conventional transit, you must be able to pay the same way on specialized transit. Well, in London in 2019, we instituted a tap card system. So you get on the bus, you tap your card, off you go. 2024, you are not able to use the tap card in paratransit. A clear violation. The website, not AODA compliant. Clearly, many violations. We found that by going through the legal system, we had a mechanism now to identify where the organization was falling short in clear and undisputable terms. We also started to work on the political structure, started to work from the back up. So who is responsible for transit in Ontario? It is the municipal government. Who is in charge? Well, Civil Works in London is the first step up into City Council. We also discovered that 2023 was an important time to act because it was the start of the 4-year strategic planning structure in our city. So this was the time to get new rules, new expectations, new outcomes on the books. We also realized that we had a lot of allies on council. It turns out there were a lot of city councilors that were tired of getting phone calls about how bad paratransit was, and they were ready to act. This allowed us to engage not just city council, but to start to put pressure on the LTC. Last but certainly not least, though, I think the communication ISA was perhaps the most important. I think we were able to be successful because we were not just one voice, one person saying there was a problem, but we were able to show that there was a community of people that were struggling with transit. More than that, though, we were able to articulate the real life experience of discrimination, the real life experience of barriers, about how people's lives were fundamentally changed by their inability to access transit. One of the key focuses in our gathering of stories was, where is a time in which your regular life was disrupted by a lack of transit? As you can see from some of the stories on the screen, we had an individual who was a big fan of local music. He loved going to bars and listening to live bands. And this is something that he was not able to do because he couldn't get rides on transit. Not a lot of people have that problem. If you want to go to the bar, you can usually jump on the bus, book an Uber, you can make it there. This makes sense to people. If they think about losing that in their life, they understand why transit is important. Ultimately, this meant working with journalists and building affinity with journalists that were willing to tell the story. So we started contacting local media, finding people that were interested in this story, and started to provide them with these examples, connect them with people that can tell a story, because ultimately that's what journalists want and need to do. They want to tell a story about things that are happening in the community. So we started to trickle stories, meaning that we had a story about transit in London News pretty much every 2 weeks for about a year, which is pretty good coverage ultimately. So I think last but certainly not least, I think we could learn a little bit from marketing when we're thinking about about activism. I think that often we think of activism as the sort of overarching story of rebellion and resistance. But I think if we take some messages from marketing, we can learn something really important. I want to draw your eyes to the right side of the slide, which is the key behavior drivers. When we think about activism, what we're really talking about is trying to convince people to do something differently. And for anyone in the room or watching online who know about marketing, there are really 4 things that we need to consider when it comes to changing behavior or trying to induce a certain behavior piece. Most of us, when we're trying to decide something to do, we're influenced by 4 things, 4 impacts. Number 1, benefit. What benefit is it for me to do this thing? There are lots of benefits to changing things in City Hall or changing things at the provincial government. Maybe it's the benefit of the politician looking like a good person, but maybe not. Maybe it's about access to employment. Turns out if you have transit, people might be able to work. And if people are working, maybe they're not on ODSP. And maybe that brings down the potential cost of ODSP. Thinking about the benefits of change is really important. So too is cost. What is it going to cost me to change? This was a massive problem when it comes to paratransit, because paratransit as a service is fundamentally not profitable. It just isn't. That doesn't mean it's not something we should do, though. What it does mean is that we should think strategically about the cost that we're putting into it. In the case of paratransit in Ontario and London, we were funding paratransit less than the increased percentage per year in ridership, meaning that we were actually losing access to transit every year as more people were enrolling than we were funding every year. This is a costly mistake. We also need to think about others. What will others think of us based on what we do? This is a very effective thing, I think, in some ways, for journalists. Journalists want to be seen as telling true stories. They want to be seen as speaking truth to power. If you don't act, what stories are not being told? Stories of disabled people are often not given the priority that they should in our community. Much of our history is lost because we don't write it down. This is an opportunity for journalists to be a part of recording a history that is often not recorded, often a compelling story. But the most important thing, the one that I think we always have to remember as advocates, is this question of self-efficacy. What can we do to have an impact? Problems like transit, problems like access to healthcare, access to education, access to employment, these can seem insurmountable, larger than a single person could ever manage to change. Part of our job then, I think, as activists, as advocates, is to make the intangible tangible, to make it seem as though we can have an impact. We can change things. This means thinking about solutions that are feasible, thinking about solutions that are viable, and thinking about solutions that fit within the structures that currently exist, whether it be legal structures, cultural structures, education structures, policy structures. As an advocate, then, we need to be kind of everything, a full service business, someone who reads the policy, understands the structure, communicates a story, and makes a plan that can be activated. This in and of itself may seem insurmountable, but in this room here today, as we look around at the people sitting at the table, if we look online, the people that are logging in have been logging in for the last few days to participate in this, we are not alone. There are many of us, and many hands make light work. But we need to start to work together. We need to find the problems that we wish to work on and unify on those problems, because with a lot of people, we actually can get this done. So I'm going to stop yammering for now, and yeah, hopefully we'll have a chance to talk after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Now our next speaker is going to be virtual, so I'm going to get her to turn her camera on. We're going to highlight her. And then Leah, you can also share your screen now, okay?
Great. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for apparently braving a marathon in Ottawa to get here this morning. It was really interesting listening to what Dr. Preston had to say, and it does segue somewhat into the presentation that I'm going to do today. I'm Leah Miltchin Carson. I am the executive assistant to the president and CEO of Easter Seals Canada, which is the national office of Easter Seals. And this morning I'll be talking about both Easter Seals Canada and our provincial Easter Seals members, of which Dr. Preston has been involved with Easter Seals Ontario, I understand. So without further ado, so about Easter Seals, Easter Seals is Canada's largest charitable organization for people with disabilities. We are now 102 years old, and we have members in every province across the country. Easter Seals Canada, which is the national organization, our goals are to lead advancement towards an inclusive society for persons with disabilities, to advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities, to raise awareness, and to support our provincial partners in their delivery of programs and services. And this is important, where every individual with a disability is valued and empowered. Just a brief history of Easter seals. Easter seals actually started in the United States in 1919. In Canada, it was founded by a group of 7 Rotary clubs who met in Windsor, Ontario, in November of 1922. They were inspired by Easter seals in the United States and wanted to start something similar in Canada to meet the great need. Originally, Easter Seals was known as the Ontario Society for Crippled Children. We've certainly made a lot of progress in terms of the language that we use around disability now. And their original goal was to provide supports and opportunities for children with disabilities. And at that time, it was all physical disabilities. Over the ensuing years, a number of other organizations started to crop up in different provinces with the same goals and the same aspirations. And eventually they came together in 1962 to form what is now Easter Seals. Easter Seals is I guess, a conglomerate, if you want to use that word, of independent provincial members, all under the brand of Easter Seals, and the brand is owned by Easter Seals Canada. So first I'm going to talk specifically about Easter Seals Canada, which is the organization that I work for. Easter Seals Canada may be best known, if it's known at all, because it's a name that a lot of people have heard of, but they're not necessarily very well acquainted with what we do. Those who are acquainted with us probably know about our Access to Card program. We also offer a disability travel card. We run national campaigns and events. We advocate for the rights and the needs of people with disabilities of all kinds. We do public awareness, and we provide fundraising support for our provincial provincial Easter Seals programs and services. Pardon me. What we don't do at the national level, we are not a funder. We do not provide direct funding or equipment to individuals or organizations. And aside from the Access to and Disability travel cards, we do not run any of our own programs or services. The programs and services that you'll probably be interested in are all provided by the provincial Easter Seals member organizations. So a little bit about the Access to card. This is a card that was developed by Easter Seals Canada in 2014, and people. I think we have about 106,000 users of the card now across Canada. People who have the Access To card can go to participating cultural and entertainment venues across the country, of which Cineplex is one of our major partners. When showing the card, the person with the disability pays the regular admission price, but their support person is able to get in for free or at a steep discount, depending on the venue. Those who are eligible for the card are people with permanent disabilities who require the assistance of a support person. And the cost, which has not changed in 10 years, is $20 for a 3-year card or $30 for 5 years. We also have the disability travel card. Also, same eligibility, people with permanent disabilities who need the assistance of a support person when they are traveling across the country with via rail. They are our sole disability travel card partner at the moment. And similar to the Access To card, the support person receives a reduced fare when traveling on VIA, and the person with the disability pays their regular fare. There is no cost for this card. So just a little bit about some of the campaigns and events that Easter Seals Canada runs. Red Shirt Day has grown in popularity significantly since it started in 2019. This is a campaign that we hold annually on the Wednesday of National Accessibility Week, which starts on the last Sunday of May every year. The idea behind Red Shirt Day is to show support for people with disabilities and their families, to celebrate the accomplishments and achievements of disabled Canadians, and also to show a commitment to a fully accessible and inclusive society. Participation in Red Shirt Day is very easy. We just ask people to wear a red shirt and to make a pledge to support people with disabilities, take a selfie, and post it out on social media with the hashtags Red Shirt Day and Red for Accessibility. You can learn more about that on the Easter Seals Canada website or at redshirtday.ca. Another national campaign we have that's been running since, I believe, 2006 is the Drop Zone. Drop Zone. We're right in the middle of Drop Zone season right now, and the Drop Zone is an annual fundraising and awareness event. It's held in various cities across the country, and we ask participants to raise pledges. And what they do is they they face their fears and rappel down the side of an enormous office building. Anybody who is of legal age in the province that they reside in can participate in Drop Zone, and it doesn't matter whether you are able to walk, whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you use some kind of assistive device for mobility. It's completely adapted, and everybody is able to participate. Another campaign we have, it was formerly known as the Paper Egg Campaign, held every March in association with March being Easter Seals Month. This was largely an awareness and fundraising campaign. One of our large supporters is Booster Juice, and we are undergoing a brand refresh for the Paper Egg campaign next year. It is going to be renamed the Unstoppable campaign, and we'll have more information about that on our website in the coming weeks. The other thing we do that's very important on a national level is advocacy. We collaborate with other organizations and leaders in the disability sector on issues of common interest. We engage regularly with folks in government on public policy issues that affect people with disabilities. And all of our advocacy efforts are very transparent and above board. We are registered with the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying of Canada. So the things that we focus on right now are things that that we've heard that people with disabilities most need. So our key areas of focus currently are affordability, which is huge for everybody in the country, and especially for those with disabilities. Easter Seals Canada was one of a number of organizations that was very instrumental in the government creating the Canada Disability Benefit. But do not blame us for the low amount. We were very disappointed in it too. We like to think that it's a starting point. We also advocate for employment opportunities because we know that when people with disabilities have employment opportunities, it's not an act of charity. It's good for the economy. It's good for the person with the disability, for businesses, for consumers. Housing is another big one. We know that there's a housing crisis throughout Canada, and we advocate not only for affordable housing, but also for more accessible housing. Through our advocacy work recently, we learned that the housing catalog, the federal housing catalog, now includes designs that are accessible. So we consider that quite an accomplishment. And finally, transportation, and you heard Dr. Preston talk about that. Transportation is huge, whether we're talking about, local public transit, airfare or air transit, train transit. There is so much more work that needs to be done so that people with disabilities are able to get around, for the same fares, at the same comfort level, and at the same convenience level. Public awareness is something that Easter Seals Canada also does. Most of our communication is through social media, and we like to use our social media to let people know about things that are happening with government, with other organizations, special days, advocacy that's going on, anything that we feel is important for people with disabilities and their supporters and allies to know about. So now we're going to talk about what's probably of most interest, which is the Easter Seals organizations that are found across Canada. We have 10 members of the Easter Seals family that serve people with disabilities from coast to coast. You'll notice on the map here that not all of them actually have Easter Seals in their names. They are Easter Seals affiliate organizations, but they go by different names in their own provinces. So the first thing that Easter Seals may be known for in terms of programs and services provincially are accessible summer camps. Every single province, every single provincial member of Easter Seals offers opportunities for children, youth, and young adults with disabilities to attend fully accessible and inclusive summer camps, whether they run the camps themselves or just provide funding so that people can attend other accessible camps that are run by groups like Rotary clubs or others. There are also day camps for children and youth. And when the pandemic started, we had to get innovative really quickly. And we still offer a few virtual camps, which are really great for people who cannot necessarily get to a physical camp, but still want to participate in some kind of a summer camp experience online. Easter Seals provincial members also offer assistive and adaptive technology. Many provide financial assistance for mobility equipment, assistive technologies. In Ontario, incontinence supplies are funded, as well as home and auto modifications. Some of our provincial members offer equipment recycling programs and equipment loans. Provincially, Easter Seals also offers a number of sport, recreation, and leisure programs. All of them are adaptive and fully accessible. So we have sports, fitness activities, recreational events, all designed to enhance health and well-being. and a number of leisure activities and social events. Swimming, skiing, art workshops, social groups, and holiday celebrations. A couple of our provincial members also offer residential and respite care. So respite services, that's temporary care to providers, healthcare providers, to parents and other family members, that offers some relief to caregivers of the individuals with disabilities, and some residential facilities. So short-term accommodations for people who are traveling from far out of town. If their children need to have some medical attention at a local hospital or for medical treatments or appointments, and also longer term housing that has supportive care for people who require it continuously. Provincially, a number of our organizations offer education and training benefits such as scholarships and bursaries, employment training and placement opportunities, life skills and financial literacy training. And resources and service coordination that's offered by some of our provincial Easter Seals message. So families can get information about the local supports and services they can receive from governments and from other disability organizations, and also service coordination to help the families access programs and resources in their own communities. And a few are responsible for issuing accessible parking permits in their province. And there are lots more, way too many to name here this morning. The important thing to keep in mind is that Easter Seals programs and services are quite variable across the province, or I'm sorry, across the country, from one province to another. Not all programs and services are offered in every province. And on the Easter Seals Canada website, you can learn more about what is available from Easter Seals in your own local province. So thank you for listening to my presentation this morning. I am going to turn it over to the host now, and I believe there will be some question and answer sessions for Dr. Preston and for me.
Yes. Thank you so much, Leah. So we still have you up on the screen, so if someone has a question, you can answer. Does anyone in the audience today have any questions? Or online? It's a pretty quiet crowd today, Leah.
Yeah, it's early on a Sunday morning. Yeah. I get it.
Okay, here we go. We have something online. I am planning to build an inclusive house and was wondering if there are any funding availability opportunities.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Easter Seals Canada and its provincial affiliates do not provide any funding for building inclusive housing. I am not personally aware of any funding opportunities that exist. However, there might be some through other organizations, possibly March of Dimes Canada, and possibly the federal government. There might be some financial programs to assist with that.
Yeah, I could also step in on that to build on Leah's answer. Yeah, the March Times is a big one that a lot of people talk about for home renovation, as well as auto as well. I would also really recommend that people investigate service clubs in their area. Rotary has been a huge supporter of mine and my family for years and years and years and years. I think Rotary clubs are fantastic. And the nice thing about Rotary is that it's a local organization, right? It's local business leaders in a community that are looking to try and help people in their community. So reaching out to people like Rotary and explaining kind of the need that you're facing, what you need, especially for equipment funding, elevators and that sort of thing. The other thing to think about is the federal tax credits. So as you are doing renovations on your home, keep your receipts, keep all of the receipts. and make sure that you are submitting that as part of your taxes. You are able to get rebates for accessibility changes that are being made to your home. And then also, for better or worse, there's also the potential for online fundraising. So using web platforms like GoFundMe, this sort of platform where you're able to set up a goal, explain to people what it is you're trying to do, the change that needs to happen, and then starting to hustle in the local community to try to generate donations. These things can actually be very, very effective, particularly if you are able to show very clearly what it is you're trying to do, what it's going to cost, and what change it's going to make in your or your family member's life. Being able to tell that story is really important when it comes to online fundraising. But you might actually be surprised the type of support that's out there, particularly on the platforms where people are only giving $5, $10, but it all adds up. If 100 people all pitch in, you would start to generate some funds. So that would be another way to think about the potential for funding. But unfortunately, there really isn't a whole lot of structured means to pay for accommodations built into homes. And what we do know about building is that it's far more expensive to make something accessible after the fact. It's far cheaper to do it up front. That's why I think some of the work that Easter Seals is doing at the federal level to get accessible designs into the registry is so important, because it is way cheaper to do it first when you first build the building. So yeah, there's not a whole lot out there structured, but the way to do it really is to start working in your own community.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's about it. So thank you both so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.